Good morning. My name is Richard Wexler, and we want to welcome you to episode 15 of our podcast entitled Caring in America. And as I do with each episode, kind of a quick recap. You go back about 18 years, my family is kind of living what I would consider the quote unquote normal life. Then all of a sudden, we have four parents in their 80s, and the phone starts ringing, and parent after parent after parent is not doing well. And our life changed as theirs did, and we wound up caring for all four of those parents for 14 years. Started my company, Points of Life, have been able to educate actually thousands of people about this issue of aging and caring, and then started the podcast so we could reach out to even more people. So we've talked about the term placement before, and we're about to bring on a guest in a few minutes to talk more about that. It's a pretty interesting concept, and unfortunately, most people out there, probably including myself, if I go back those 18 years, didn't know what placement was and really didn't know how placement could be extremely beneficial to my family and my older loved ones. So our guest, his name is Jeffrey Cave. He's the executive director of Parent Placement Solutions. He works out of Windsor, California, and we'll talk about where that is in a few minutes. And his company helps seniors and their families in Sonoma County and across the North Bay when living alone really isn't an option anymore. They're going to provide an assessment of what that living situation is currently, what it needs to be in the future. They're going to provide guidance. They're going to provide support. They're going to provide trust. And the next word that I'm going to say is a four-letter word, but it's a pretty good four-letter word. Their services are free in that, and Jeff can talk more about that. The building, once mom, dad, grandma moves in, will actually pay for his services so it doesn't cost the family any money at all. Are you there, Jeff? Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
You're very welcome. So, first of all, where's Windsor, California?
Windsor is directly north, about 55 miles north of San Francisco, straight up the 101 freeway.
If I'm not wrong, would that be wine country around there?
It is absolutely. I've heard it is the number one destination wine country in the U.S.
Wow. So, folks, I'm sorry we're bringing on somebody that lives in such a gorgeous place. It is beautiful. What's your weather like today?
Today it's about 86. Will be the max today, but we've had, as everywhere, a bit of a heat wave the last couple of weeks. But
Yeah,
generally, it cools down to the mid 50s in the evening. So
I
perfect
know
for
the.
growing grapes.
There you go. I know the heat well. Up here in beautiful Idaho, we've been a little hot. Was about 105 yesterday, and I think we may be similar. So yeah, a little warm.
Yeah.
So placement, very interesting term, and I've talked about this in previous episodes that we've done. And I wanted to bring in an expert in the field. So before we kind of get into placement and what it is and how it works and so on and so forth, what got you into the elder care field in the first place?
Richard, I gosh, more than 25 years ago, graduated and college wanted to really get into advertising. Had a marketing degree, and I got an opportunity to market the outreach for a brand new 73 apartment assisted living community here in town. I had known the owner. He said, "Well, I'll give you 4 months to get some experience behind you." Never in my wildest dreams did I think this would be my calling. Getting to know the residents, getting to know that we're making their lives better, just catapulted my career into a direction I never knew was coming.
So let's talk about that. So I know you, correct me if I'm wrong, before the placement industry, you've worked in the communities. Is that correct?
Correct. Half of my career is sales and marketing, as a director for continuing care, retirement communities, assisted living and memory care. And early in my career, I was a nursing home administrator down in Southern California for about 5 years.
Interesting. And what attracted you to the placement business?
Um, well, stepping back, after about 10 years as the executive director of larger facilities, here in 2017, we had the Tubbs fire, which my partner and I lost our homes, and we had to evacuate our building. Another fire in 2019, we also had to evacuate our building, and then of course the onset of March 17th, 2020, when we had to close the doors because of COVID. Really saw the deterioration of my residents because of what we were forced to do, keeping residents in their rooms. Um, I decided to take just a regional job. So during COVID, I was traveling to Southern California and just totally got burned out. I felt like I was doing a disservice to the residents, and I wanted to try something different and focus on families doing and dealing with the process of transitioning mom out of a home. And so thought of placement as really a win-win for me and the clients that I work with, and it's been fantastic the last over 3 years.
So before we get into placement, let's kind of talk about some of the residents you were working with. Do you have any idea how the majority of them found the buildings you were working within? Do you know if they were using placement at that point, whether a son, daughter, someone was making calls? Any idea?
I would say a majority are families would live in the area, and if their families lived outside, they wanted to bring their parent closer. So it was the daughter, typically the daughter, making phone calls to as many places as they can, trying to gather information. Um, there are some national chains of placement organizations, and it's kind of like trial by fire for a lot of families. And I felt like, wow, I can be, because I know how the operations work in facilities and what they need. I could be such. I felt like I could be such a resource to families in a lot of areas. So,
And
um,
I get that in that, first of all, and we'll talk about this, and I want to get your thoughts. In my experience over the 18 years of doing this, and again, this was us 18 years ago, most families don't really understand what a building is, what an assisted living is. They don't understand what a memory care community is. California, and I'll ask you if in the North Bay you have what's very prevalent throughout other parts of the Bay Area and Southern California, and what they call, I hate the term, but they call board and cares. And what I find is people just don't realize what these buildings are, and don't realize there's people like you out there that are like, I mean, you do a lot more than this, but like a guide that's going to really help them understand the appropriate place for mom, the appropriate place for dad, grandparents, based on age, based what their current condition is. Can you kind of talk about that a little more?
well, yeah, in Sonoma County, there are over 200 licensed RCFE or residential care for the elderly. Um, and that's a lot for families to digest. Like, and I personally, before I started, I didn't know there was that many these boarding care, smaller 6-bed homes that are terrific because the ratio of care to residents are much higher than the larger communities. Um, but it's about finding out deficiencies that they have and doing the research on each one of them to make sure that they're up to my standards to be able to refer those to families coming in.
Sure. So, I mean, am I alone, or do you kind of agree with me that a lot of families don't really understand what a placement company is like yours and exactly how you guys help? Am I wrong, or and if I am, tell me, or do you somewhat agree?
Oh, I definitely agree. I think initially families are amazed that there's somebody like Parent Placement Solutions out there, especially in their market, to help them through this process. And I think at first they find there's got to be some catch because nothing's for free. Um, and the win-win is my client is not the facility, even though they're the ones that eventually pay a fee if the family chooses them. The client and their family are my or the family and their resident loved one is my client.
So let's kind of put together a fictitious story. So I call you. Let's say I live someplace in the Bay Area. Let's say my grandmother, who's 85, lives in the Sonoma County area. I hear something about this placement idea. I hear about you guys. Maybe I Google you and find you. So, what is our initial conversation like? What type of information are you looking for?
I'm looking for an idea of what are the daily needs of your mom. If the mom is the focus, what does she need as she gets up in the morning, what she needs throughout the day, and then her nighttime routines, and in the middle of the night, like what are they seeing that she needs support? And that's part of what I do in my assessment when I meet the client. But uh, it can be a really short conversation, 15 to 30 minutes, where we just discuss what they're looking for, what they can describe as the needs of the mom, what's the budget. Sometimes they're really surprised that unfortunately their Medicare or other insurances don't cover assisted living, which is really unfortunate. There is a California waiver program in the Medi-Cal system, but it's a broken system, and very few people get Medi-Cal to cover assisted living. But average cost, I let families know it's in Sonoma County. You can Google it and get so many different numbers, but when I place somebody, it's between 5 and 7,500 a month, which covers room and board, and depending on how much care, how much time a specific resident needs on a daily basis.
What type of room are they going to wind up in?
In a smaller six-bed home, generally it's a private room or a bedroom. In a larger scaled community, it's anywhere from a studio apartment to a generally one bedroom apartment, but sometimes they have two bedroom and two bath apartments.
Any idea on a one bedroom? I'm just so people out there understand. Any idea on a one bedroom apartment? Because, I'll get to the question in a second. But mom's, let's say, in a 1,500 square foot house. She's been in that house for quite a while. Obviously, I'm assuming the room is going to be smaller. But what's the average square feet, if you know, in a one bedroom that mom may move into?
Yeah, in one of the communities that I was the executive director of, most of our apartments were studio apartments, very small, like less than 300 square feet. But typically, a one bedroom apartment runs in the 5 to 700 square feet. And how you sell community life is you're selling the 60,000 square foot mansion. There's a library, there's an activity room, there's a main dining room, there's other points of service, and that's part of your community where your apartment is really the place you go to be alone and sleep and come out and be part of the community.
So you just hit on something that I've talked about a lot over the years, and that's the whole one word isolation, where people, I'm going to die with my boots on at home. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying at home. I know my husband has passed. I'm 83 years old, but I'm going to stay at home. And what you just said, if they choose to move to a community, let's say a larger community, can you kind of walk through a lot of the activities that they may see once they move in?
That is probably the biggest. That and the dining options are the biggest differential between a smaller home and the larger setting. And so you're going to have dedicated directors in different departments. So you have a dedicated activity person. So every day, 7 days a week, they've got a calendar of programs, usually every hour. And it's not that residents have to do all of those, but it allows them the opportunity to choose and be part of an activity committee. So as residents come in, they have different likes and dislikes, and they can add to the program. Now that COVID's fairly over, we're bringing in a lot more outside entertainment again. So it's just during COVID, I mean, it was bleak. Nothing was going on until we kind of came through the cloud. But
One one thing that I hear, and tell me if you hear the same thing. There may be some objection initially to leaving the house, moving to a community. But what I've heard personally and what I've heard professionally, a lot of people after a month or two are saying, why didn't I do this sooner?
definitely, you don't know what don't know. There's a lot of fear in this transition, especially if they've been at the same home for 30, 40, 50 years. You feel like you're the only one making this transitional move, and a lot of families wait until they're very frail, and it doesn't become mom's true decision. It's based on necessity. Um, they can have in-home care coming in, but that's when I said $500 to $7,500 a month for room and board and care. Home care around the clock is $20,000 to $25,000
Yeah.
a month.
Yeah. It's insane. Do you, I mean, and I want to be honest with people, do you see situations once in a while where they may need to bring an in home care company into a community to add even more care for mom, dad, whoever it may be?
Um, when I was running communities, yes, there was very rare occasions where it's on a temporary basis. Maybe it's a safety reasons that a resident is a extreme high fall risk and an extreme high dementia, where they're very agitated and they need somebody in the room with them for their safety, and that typically is for several days to several weeks until a game plan could be, a change is made.
And I know this can vary per location and vary whether it's a large assisted living or whether it's a small board and care, but what's your experience with the quality of the meals?
Yeah, well, a lot of my clients come out of post-acute rehab, and their biggest complaint of that is that the food is awful. Uh,
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
get it. Go ahead.
yeah, and so when they go into at least the communities that I've run, you have an executive chef and you have his team that they're meal prepping weeks in advance, and then they're usually seasonal um, menus. And even in these smaller board and cares, they will talk to residents about what their likes and dislikes are, but you won't get as typically as much variety as you do in the larger settings because they just have more ability to provide
Sure.
a larger menu.
Will there be any consideration mom's on a special diet, dad can't eat certain things? I mean, are those, I don't know the answer. Are those questions asked of the residents when they first move in?
Yeah, and usually before they move in, that's part of the assessment, and that's part of developing a care plan. So if they have specific diets, usually it's low sodium or a heart healthy diet. Those are all typically items already on menus. Um, but when they have like they're vegan, there's going to have or vegetarian certain types of diets that are a personal choice can sometimes be more difficult than just what is medically necessary.
Sure, sure. Now let's backtrack a little bit to that scenario you were talking about. Mom in her 80s. You guys have had, maybe it's with mom, the daughter, son, you've had that initial conversation, done that assessment. What's the next step after that initial conversation, usually?
Now that we know what budgets are looking like, and I'm also not opposed to saying, you know what, maybe initially let's bring some care in the home to see how that works. That's not what we do, but I refer other companies to provide that service as an option. Um, but generally, it's going out. I canvass the area as far as who has openings. If a resident's really frail, I tend personally to focus on the smaller homes because they can be in their room, they can be in the living room. It's if they needed help, they have sensors, but they also can hear you if you needed something because it's a residential home. Versus if they're up a second floor in their apartment with a closed door, you only get interactions, every depending upon the care plan. So I go out, I search what's available. I return back to the family and give them dates and times of when we can go tour. And
How does
if
that
my
work?
schedule,
Go ahead. How does that whole touring process work?
so I find out what times are available for the families to make tours happen, whether that's the weekends, whatever time works for them, and then I set that up with the facilities, and then I will meet them at those facilities of choice at the days and times that we've selected. And then I'm there to help advocate and answer questions along with the provider, but also ask questions that they might not be thinking of. And I provide the families with a list of questions I've developed that they can ask when they're on these tours. Specifically, what are medical reasons why my mom would have to leave? Um, can we talk to another family member about how they like your program and just get an idea of what their life will be like there.
So, Jeff, we've been talking about quite a few different issues here, and I think last we were talking about touring and how that works. A question I have, I mean, we're talking in your area, 5, 6, $7,000. Do you ever get involved with a potential client and helping them understand how they may be able to pay for that?
Yeah, in most cases, there's sometimes a little sticker shock, and then how do we overcome that? I ask my clients, does was your parents in the military? So there's VA benefits out there. Possibly, do they have a long-term care insurance policy, which does cover assisted living? Um, and then do they own their home and potentially now that they're going to make this permanent move is selling the home an option which should be able to cover average home in Sonoma County is $800,000 and this age group in their 80s typically have their homes paid for. So if they're fortunate to own a home, they're fortunate to pretty much have every option open to them. But also my role is to not always, let's say the family says our budget's really 6,000. That's all we can do, and that's putting this, and this together. I go back to the facility and try to negotiate lower prices. If they said it's 65, and I say, well, they can do six. If that's something you can handle, then they're going to move forward. So I advocate to lower prices anytime I can.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, is that something, will communities move on that? Will they give you that lower price?
They, yes, they will. Sometimes if they're not, I mean, it just depends on the market. I've found that the board and cares, because there's only six residents that they're caring for, and if they have an opening, they're very open to negotiation if it's going to fill the room and as quickly as possible. So my services also help expedite a move.
Do you find a price differential from the larger assisted living? I want to make sure we talk about memory care before we finish up. Do you find a price differential between the larger assisted living and the smaller board and care?
They're around the same prices. The difference is the larger facilities will have a distinct um, two costs. One cost is the rent or room and board. So that might be the fee based on the size of the apartment, and that might be 4,000 or 4,500 or 5,000. And then they have a care plan and how much time and needs do the resident have, and that might be as little as 500 or it could be as much because they need a lot of two-person assist. It could be 25 to $3,000 on top of their rent.
Wow, got
So
it.
whereas the board and cares kind of look overall care and they give a price.
So, from a board and care perspective, and we've talked about this briefly, do you normally see a different type of client there? Maybe dementia, maybe recovering from a stroke, maybe a little bit older than you'll see in a larger assisted living.
I would say age is about the same regardless. We all age differently. So average age of a move is between 80 and 83. But we age again It's either our minds are going, our bodies are going, or both. I see definitely there's a higher level of care and dementia in a board and care setting, um, where they can take a resident out of their bedroom, take them into the living room, bring them to the dining room table for meals and things. It's a much more frail resident that if they were to live in a larger setting and down long hallways, it's just not going to work um, to their advantage. So with a large facility, again, it's about engagement, entertainment. It's kind of like a cruise ship without seasick. So
Got it. Got it. One thing I mentioned a couple minutes ago I wanted to talk about, would you help families find an appropriate memory care community?
eh, along it's all along the same lines. So if it's licensed by the same residential care for the elderly, Department of Social Services. And so if they need true memory care, where it's a secured environment, it's a much more structured program. We have several really great ones in our area of North Bay, and it goes through the same process. And I show them multiple styles, and it's up to the families to decide what's going to be a good fit for their mom.
So, I think you mentioned too an assessment being done before mom or dad moves in. Is that correct? Is that a physical, mental assessment? How does that work? What's entailed there?
Initially, my assessment is called a pre-placement assessment or appraisal, and that lets me know a better picture of what their care needs are when I make my search for facilities. But once the family's selected or made a decision on where they want to move forward to, that community themselves will meet mom or dad, whether they're at home, whether they're in post-acute rehab, and do their own assessment to again come up with their own personal care plan and understand what the full needs are. Um,
Sure. Sure. And one last thing we kind of want to end with, and I know this is a big subject. We've talked about cost and we've talked about realistically what it may cost for mom or dad to actually live in, whether it's memory care, assisted living, small assisted living. But then we started by talking about the fact that in essence, your services do not cost anything. And I know people always, well, yeah, what's the catch? How does that work? Can you explain that?
yeah, it's funny because I think all of us are like, wait a minute, it's our nature to not believe that anything good can be free. And I think initially, if a social worker gives a family parent placement solutions as, hey, these people can help, the families can be reluctant because they think, well, they're going to have to pay something for our services because they're already thinking about like costs for care that they weren't planning for. So when I talk to the families, and also when I educate the social workers, that I be transparent. I say, even though I get a fee from the facility that you choose, and I can work with any community, so it's not like I only have a handful to work with. Anyone in California, I can actually place, but for them to know that I'm your advocate and I'm with them. I actually check in once mom moves in. I'm checking back with the family 90 days later to see how things are going. Because if there's any complaints or any issues, I want to make sure that that's taken care of.
Sure. I mean, that's fantastic. And I got to believe that most people, when they hear that pricing structure and the fact that your services aren't going to cost them anything, I got to believe they're pretty happy.
Absolutely. And sometimes I ask, hey, payment from you, go to Google. If you thought I did a fantastic job, give us a 5-star review. And pretty much they're all very excited and thankful.
Perfect. This has been a great time this morning. I think we've learned a lot about placement, a term, as I said, that most people don't really understand what it is, but the information you've given them, I'm really hoping that it helps. Um, I want you to give us your company information in a few minutes, but what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, it's as the company grows, Google searching is a way, but I made my website. It's parentplacementsolutions.com, but they can also go to parentps.com and they can set up a consultation that we can discuss what are their options and what's happening, and I can give them within 15 minutes kind of a direction, and then that way I can explain exactly how our services work for them and what would be the best option for her mom or dad.
Perfect. So is there a phone number they can contact you at as well?
Yeah, they can call 707-687-5817. And my cell phone, which is always on me, is 707-537-5510.
This is fantastic. I really thank you for joining us today, Jeff. As I said, I think it's some great, valuable information. And what I want people to understand, there's not just folks in placement in Northern California, Sonoma County, they exist all over the country. That they may be private companies, they may be franchises, however they're set up, but placement people, I'm not going to say they're in every city of every state, but there are a lot of placement people around the country wherever you may need them for mom, dad, in laws, grandparents, whatever the situation might be. So, again, some fantastic information. As I always leave on our podcast, I want to make sure people have an email address to reach out to me with comments, questions, uh, sharing a story. If you want to reach out to me so we can put on our podcast your story that maybe you're currently going through or you've gone through in the past. And if you're concerned about giving out real name or names of moms and dads, we can make sure we don't do that, especially if you're in a situation right now. But we would love to talk about your story in your voice on one of our episodes. So please reach out. Do you have a pen? The email is eldered2023 at gmail.com. ELDERED 2023 at gmail.com. So once again, we want to thank Jeff. We want to thank you folks for listening. And until we talk again, folks, have an awesome day. Bye-bye.